How you doing? So, the crowd from Hong Kong to be here?
We were up in New York, a number of events up in New York, a lot of statements. It was up there. We were at a big Tiananmen related event at, I think it was NYU. They participated in last week.
I mentioned to Pelosi about the,
Tiananmen hearing?
yeah, so,
Thank you. I'll let them know.
yeah, so she totally, I just had a message this morning.
I guess the question is, does she want to be on the dais or does she want to be?
Yeah, whatever's coming up, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Here you go, Mr. McGovern.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, wow. It says it's a commission gavel.
Actually, this is neat, yeah. So in the Rules Committee, a reporter was doing a story on the new chairs, and they wanted to focus in on the gavel. And, you know, they went to the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, and he brought out a gavel and a silk box, and it had all this history to it. And then the Appropriations Committee, Nita Lowy showed her gavel, and then they asked him, I said, I'm happy to, and I just became chair of the Rules Committee. I said, where's the gavel? And they said, I think your predecessor stole it. We don't have one. So my dad came down for my swearing in, and he said, I got a gavel for you. So he gives me the gavel and has one of these little plates on it, and I knock into the hearing, and while I'm looking at it, it says, I thought it would say Jim McGovern, Chairman of the Rules Committee. It says Walter F. McGovern, President of Worcester County Package Store Association. Package store is a liquor store. My father has a liquor store, and so that is the Rules gavel. So this is a little bit more appropriate.
So you'll have to pass that gavel on to your son.
Yeah, I will. I mean, I don't think the next chair of the Rules Committee is going to want a President of Worcester County Package Store Association gavel.
So the center is finishing up a call. Hopefully it'll be here soon, but it said if you want to get started right at 10 to get started, jump right in.
Okay, all right, good. We'll get 2 minutes, so we're all good.
Chairman McGovern, you know you were my neighbor for a year
Where?
on Lincoln Park. I
Oh,
lived
yeah.
in Eric's basement.
Oh, my goodness.
But no, I only lived there for a year. But it's an awesome location.
No, you know, it's convenient for me, and, you know, in the Rules Committee, we meet all Executive Commission on China for the 116th Congress. The title of today's hearing is Hong Kong's Future in the Balance, Eroding Autonomy and Challenges to Human Rights. And our co-chair, Senator Rubio, will be here shortly, but said that I should start without him, and he will come right in when he gets here, and we'll yield to him. But in recent years, there has been a steady erosion of Hong Kong's autonomy that was enshrined in the one country, two systems framework established by the 1984 Sino-British Declaration and Hong Kong's Basic Law. Under one country, two systems, the Chinese government agreed to allow Hong Kong a high degree of autonomy, with the ultimate aim of electing its chief executive and legislative council members by universal suffrage. The Chinese government reiterated this commitment as recently as 2007, when the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress stated in a decision that universal suffrage may apply to the chief executive election in 2017 and the Legislative Council after that. It was the reneging on this commitment to make Hong Kong more democratic that sparked the 2014 umbrella movement pro-democracy protests that lasted 79 days in the streets of Hong Kong. We continue to call upon the Chinese and Hong Kong governments to restart the electoral reform process and work toward genuine universal suffrage in the Chief Executive and Legislative Council elections in accordance with Articles 45 and 68 of the Basic Law and Article 25 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Since the umbrella movement protests, Chinese and Hong Kong authorities have ramped up efforts to stifle the pro-democracy movement by removing 6 legislators from office, banning the Hong Kong National Party, and barring presidential candidates from running in elections based on their political views, expelling Financial Times Asia news editor Victor Mallet for hosting an event with the pro-independence advocate, arbitrarily detaining and abducting Hong Kong booksellers. We continue to call for the immediate and unconditional release of bookseller Gui Minhai, who is still detained in China, prosecuting and sentencing umbrella movement leaders and other pro-democracy advocates for peaceful civil disobedience, introducing a national anthem bill that stifles free expression, proposing new amendments to Hong Kong's extradition laws, which, if passed, will allow extraditions to mainland China, where the criminal justice system is regularly used as a tool of repression against political dissenters and rights advocates. And just this morning, we learned a Hong Kong court reached a guilty verdict against 6 pro-democracy advocates involved in the November 2016 peaceful protests on the Chinese government interpretation of the Basic Law concerning oath-taking. Now, many regarded the interpretation as direct Chinese government involvement in the disqualification of certain legislators, including Nathan Law, who is here with us today. The ruling signals a further chilling effect on political participation as people are deterred from taking part in demonstrations by the punishments levied against pro-democracy advocates. I believe it is time for the United States to consider new and innovative policies to support the people of Hong Kong. U.S. Hong Kong relations are governed by the U.S. Hong Kong Policy Act of 1992 that commits the United States to treating Hong Kong as a separate customs territory from the rest of China, so long as Hong Kong remains sufficiently autonomous. In the last Congress, Chairman Rubio and then co-chair Chris Smith introduced the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. Among other provisions, the legislation would require the Secretary of State to certify on an annual basis that Hong Kong is sufficiently autonomous in order to justify special economic, financial, and trade treatment for mainland China under U.S. law. Considering the events of the last year, I'm interested in hearing from the witnesses about what actions they believe the U.S. should be taking to support the people of Hong Kong. Over the years, Hong Kong has prospered and become the financial center of Asia because of its strong commitment to the rule of law, good governance, human rights, and an open economic system. It is a city where the people have had the ability to advance new ideas and innovate. The erosion of this unique system threatens not only the people who attempt to speak out, but it threatens the economic vitality of the city itself. Now, to be clear, we stand together with the people of Hong Kong and indeed all the people of China when we express our concerns about the policies of the Chinese and Hong Kong governments. Our focus today is doing right by the people of Hong Kong and our panel this morning traveled all the way from Hong Kong to provide their testimonies. Before I introduce the panel, I want to yield to our distinguished member from New Jersey, Chris Smith, for any opening statements he may have.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman McGovern, and it's great to be serving with you on both the China Commission as well as on the Lantos Commission. And thank you for holding this very important hearing, and I say the same to Co-Chair Rubio, who I believe will be joining us very shortly. Over the past 5 years, the CECC has shined a bright light on developments in Hong Kong. Senator Rubio and I and other members of Congress, as you noted a moment ago, introduced the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act and worked to reauthorize the State Department's annual report on Hong Kong until 2024. We plan to offer that bill again in this Congress and dare the American Chamber of Commerce to oppose it. Beijing's increasingly rough oversight of Hong Kong may not be as brutal as that pursued on the mainland, but it is no less pernicious. The goal is eroding Hong Kong's guaranteed freedoms and the rule of law and intimidating those who try to defend those basic rights. Chinese President Xi Jinping has concentrated power and suppressed opposition in mainland China like no leader since Mao Zedong. He has turned his attention to Hong Kong and taken steps to stifle political participation and speech through extraordinary intervention in Hong Kong's affairs. Within the last 4 years, the Hong Kong government has taken many unprecedented and repressive steps, as you know, Mr. Chairman, including disqualifying elected LegCo members, prohibited individuals from running for office, banned a political party, jailed pro-democracy protest leaders, including Nathan Law, who is here and will speak shortly, expelled a Financial Times journalist, and did little when Beijing abducted Hong Kong residents. I agree with my colleagues and the witnesses here today. The U.S. and international community should be pushing back hard against the proposed extradition amendment. It is both saddening and maddening that the government of Hong Kong, which inherited a rule of law system, may soon be extraditing individuals to China, where justice is what is expedient to the Communist Party. I was glad to see a recent statement from the U.S. State Department that it was disappointed by the decision of the Hong Kong government to prosecute and convict several Hong Kong residents for organizing peaceful protests during the Occupy Central movement in 2014. Let me say this, disappointment does not go far enough. In my opinion, Benny Tai and Chang King-min and others jailed for organizing peaceful protests should be considered political prisoners. And we have some, like Martin Lee, who for decades not only has been arrested, but has spoken out so bravely on behalf of human rights. And I remember meeting with Martin years ago for dinner in Hong Kong. This is like 30 years ago. And he was predicting even then that unless changes are made, he was worried about the trajectory of where mainland China would take Hong Kong. As part of the Lantos Commission, its project Defending Freedom, I will adopt those two individuals I mentioned a moment ago as political prisoners until they are released. In conclusion, let me say that this is in everyone's interest that Hong Kong remain a free and prosperous bridge between China and the West. The city's unique vitality and prosperity are rooted in its guaranteed freedoms and the rule of law. But if Hong Kong is to become just another mainland Chinese city, we will have to reassess whether Hong Kong warrants special status under U.S. law. The arc of history does not bend towards justice without concerted action from all freedom-loving peoples. If the United States and the international community does not defend the rights and freedoms of Hong Kong's citizens now, there is little hope that freedom can take root in mainland China in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. And we're also joined by Congressman Tom Suozzi, who's a member of this commission from New York, and we're honored to have him on the commission and look forward to working with him. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me introduce the panel. Martin Lee, founding chairman of the Democratic Party of Hong Kong, former member of the Drafting Committee for the Basic Law, and former member of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong. Mr. Lee will focus his remarks on the general trends of democracy and human rights in Hong Kong and Chinese government interference in the city. Nathan Law, founding chairman of Demosisto and former member of the Legislative Council. Mr. Law's remarks will shed light on youth perspectives of the democracy movement in Hong Kong and the challenges that they face. Mak Yin-ting, journalist and former chair of the Hong Kong Journalists Association. Ms. Mak will focus on press freedom and the treatment of journalists in Hong Kong. And finally, Cheuk-yan, General Secretary of the Hong Kong Confederation of Trade Unions and member of the Executive Committee of Hong Kong Civil Hub. Mr. Lee will share his experiences of advocacy for labor rights in Hong Kong and efforts to support democracy in mainland China. And I want to thank you all for being here today. I mean, it really is an honor for us to welcome you to Washington, D.C. and to this hearing. And before I yield to Mr. Lee to begin, let me just say one of the challenges that we have on this commission and also on the Lantos Human Rights Commission is trying to figure out ways that that we can be helpful and that the actions that we take here are constructive and not counterproductive. And you know what works and what doesn't work. And so we're going to rely on you to give us some guidance as to specific steps that we can take here to complement the work and indeed the values that you all represent. So thank you so much. And Mr. Lee, we're going to begin with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And okay, make sure your mic is on. Is it okay? Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From your opening remarks and those of Mr. Smith, I think we're going to push an open door, but still we need to push it. You have invited us very kindly to come here at a crucial time in Hong Kong, because if this terrible bill is not stopped, hopefully the government will be pressed to withdraw it. Hong Kong will never be the same again. Because until today, there are no extradition arrangements between China and this country and Canada and Britain, Great Britain. But there are such arrangements with Hong Kong, because it was thought by everybody, including Beijing, that their judicial and legal systems are not up to international standards. That's why there are no such arrangements with Beijing or with mainland China from these countries. But Hong Kong is different. Hence, we have such arrangements. This has worked very well for many, many years, both before and after 1997. But suddenly, this government under Ms. Carrie Lam wanted to change, and they claim that it's because there is a loophole. But it is not a loophole. It was deliberate. That is why even up to today, before this bill was introduced, there was no threat to Hong Kong citizens and our visitors to Hong Kong. But the moment it is passed, there will be danger to everybody. And we cannot guarantee your safety anymore. Anybody in Hong Kong, including the 85,000 American residents and those working or living in Hong Kong, because all that would be necessary to have anybody extradited back to mainland China is for the government to ask somebody to make an affidavit to say that you or this person has committed a criminal offense in China some many years ago. And the court cannot protect anybody because the court can only act on prima facie evidence. And it is very easy to concoct such a case on prima facie evidence. Hong Kong has already seen a few abductions of people from Hong Kong to China. And one of them was from the bookshop. When he finally came back to Hong Kong, he said, "I want to tell the whole world, this is not about me. This isn't about the bookstore. This is about everyone." And he is right. And this bill, which is before the Legislative Council, can be passed into law very quickly. The government's intentions are to have it passed before the early part of July this year, but they could pass it earlier because they control the legislature. Of course, President Xi Jinping wants to rule China by a law-based governance, but to him, judges exist and the legal system exists to protect the party the Chinese Communist Party. And so it is our duty to continue to preserve the rule of law. I've entered into politics because of this. I wanted to preserve the freedoms of the people of Hong Kong. But we will certainly fight with everything we have. And recently you saw a brawl even in the Legislative Council. But we need the help of the international community. And we are very happy that you have invited us. And I think the business ought to know that once trumped-up charges can be used to bring people back, then large companies like Google will face the consequences that they will be forced to go back to China, and then the Chinese authorities can extract company trade secrets from them. The AmCham has spoken recently, and we are glad that this is happening. But other people must speak up. We must all defend Hong Kong before it is too late. It is far better to defend something which we already have rather than to ask for new things. So this is not something difficult. It is certainly achievable, and we are asking you to help us to preserve what is already given to us and promised to us by both the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're also joined by Congressman Brian Mast of Florida. We want to welcome him here today. Mr. Law, welcome.
Morning, Chairman Government, Chairman McGovern, and members of the committee. Thank you for having us to speak here today. Well, it's been 5 years since the umbrella movement, and we could witness a huge encroachment on our liberty and our human rights for the past 5 years. And Mr. McGovern has been spoken it very clearly that our liberty is on shrink. And we face a lot of political retaliation on the umbrella youth leaders. I myself is a very vivid example of that. I won an election of Legislative Council in 2016 to become the youngest ever elected member of our legislature at the age of 23. And subsequently, I was ejected from the council because of the political intervention from the Beijing and the intervention to our judicial system. So it's a huge shame to our political system. And later on, subsequently, Joshua and I were all locked in jail because of the peaceful participation in the umbrella movement. And there are more scholars and professors are also locked in jail because of peaceful assembly that they have participated. So you can see it is a very clear signal that Hong Kong is no longer a place that really protects our human rights and our liberty. And Joshua is also facing a verdict tomorrow. So it's remarked that he may go back to jail to serve the sentencing time or may not. So it really depends on the verdict tomorrow. So these are the examples to show that we've been facing huge difficulties for the past 5 years. But the extradition law amendment, which is upcoming to the Legislative Council, would be a huge threat, or one of the greatest threats after the hangover in 1997. Well, by the time, journalists, human rights lawyers, LGBTQ activists, and all these activists who are supporting mainland China human rights activities will no longer be safe. And this goes to the heart of what Hong Kong people truly fear, that those of us who dare speak out to defend human rights and democracy promised to Hong Kong will risk trumped-up arrest, torture, and unfair trial in mainland China. It is very important for the community, international community, to be alert to what is happening in Hong Kong, our home, which has long been at forefront of clash of authoritarian and liberal values. Our generation is especially concerned about being sent to a place that does not respect human rights. Last year, 2 very low-profile members of our organization, Democisto, went back to China and were detained, taken to a hotel and interrogated for hours. Their phones were confiscated, and they were asked to provide names of our members and details of our activities. There was no legitimate reason to detain them, and this is a real possibility that this conduct will be normalized soon, and we will expect to hear similar story time to time again, or maybe even not, because they were being forced to confess on TV camera and they have been put in jail. Hong Kong is no longer safe for them. Yet, yes, well, for the upcoming amendment, it is an uphill battle, but we can definitely win and reverse the trend to Hong Kong. And I think here is our opinion that we need the international support. This position of against this amendment shall be made very explicit in all discussion with the Chinese government to ensure Beijing understands the potential economic consequences if it doesn't uphold its promise to Hong Kong people. I also hope that more members of Congress will be willing to place human rights at the center of future American policy on Hong Kong. I came from Hong Kong to explain Chinese Communist Party's escalating efforts to undermine our autonomy, open and free tradition. A victory for oppressive Beijing government is a victory of authoritarian anywhere in the world. A victory for Hong Kong people is a victory of freedom anywhere in the world. So I think it is my hope that Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act can garner more support in the Congress. This bill will send an unmistakable signal to China and the world that this country remains committed to the universal value that we share. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mak Yin-ting, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the Commission for the concern about Hong Kong. Hong Kong has long been a beacon for press freedom and publishing in Asia, especially in relations to China, where there's no free media. According to the government, there are 68 dailies, over 600 periodicals, and 6 electronic media. There are nearly 3,000 local and international journalists in Hong Kong, mainly international media such as the New York Times, CNN, Wall Street Journal, Reuters, and Bloomberg have regard Hong Kong as their regional hub. But as a veteran journalist and long-term freedom advocate, I know that our media freedom is not as healthy as these figures would suggest. Freedom of expression and of the press have taken a sharp downward turn in Hong Kong with the dive, particularly apparently since President Xi Jinping took power in year 2012. Self-censorship is on the rise as China's influence increases, whether it is through the co-option of media workers or the buyouts of media outlets. Sometimes, mere public statements by Chinese officials are enough to influence the reporting by the Hong Kong media without the need to issue direct instruction. According to a survey conducted by the Hong Kong Journalists Association early this year, 70% of media workers who responded said they felt uneasy when they reported opinions that deviated from the stance of the central government in Beijing. And 22% of journalists said they had come under pressure from supervisors while reporting on issues related to Hong Kong independence, which have been denounced by the central government. The figures carry even more weight when we consider that political reporters who will report on these issues make up only a small percentage of the total number of respondents. Adding to these existing pressures, the changes to Hong Kong's extradition law will threaten journalists because it will chill reporting, make reporters and editors vulnerable to pressure from Beijing, and hollow out Hong Kong's status as a global information hub. With incitement of any crime listed in the schedule of the bill, and therefore an extraditable offense, the media, whose nature is reporting on things that have impact, can easily fall full of it. What is more, Chinese government is notorious for making up offenses to stop media from reporting. The legal changes will mean Hong Kong can no longer be a safe harbor for reporters covering sensitive news in mainland China, because the proposed amendment allows the Chinese government to request the return of their targeted reporters. The natural consequence will be either a decrease in the quantity and quality of news on China, or the exodus of valuable news workers to other places that China cannot request extradition, or both. These outcomes will devastate Hong Kong as an information and financial center for the region. It is therefore in the interest of Hong Kong, the US, and other parts of the world to urge the Hong Kong government to withdraw the bill. Thank you for your support for press freedom in Hong Kong.
Thank you very much. Lee Cheuk-yan, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman McGovern. We are here because Hong Kong is not okay. This year is the 30th anniversary of the June 4th massacre. 30 years ago, I was then a young and labor democracy activist. And it was a hopeful time when we thought that, you know, the students, the people of China rise up to demand for democracy from this Communist Party regime. And in Hong Kong, we have also 1 million people marching to support that. And it's also an aspiration of people of Hong Kong because, oh, we are going to return to China. Now, China is changing, but it's a time of hope and despair. When the tanks come rolling into Tiananmen Square, when the army begin to shoot at the people across China, thousands of people die, it was a very despairing time for the people of Hong Kong because we are going to return to this regime in 1997. And since then, I vowed to myself, I will spend my lifetime in changing China before China changed Hong Kong. And this has been the case. I was the General Secretary of the Free Trade Union for the past 30 decades, fighting for labor rights in Hong Kong, also supporting Chinese workers, their fight for their independent union and their right to freedom of association. And also have been organizing the Candlelight Vigil and the support work for China democracy over the past 30 years. And I think everyone will remember the Candlelight Vigil when hundreds and thousands of people in Hong Kong lit up a candle to remember the victims. This is a fight against the Communist Party effort to wipe out the whole memory of what happened on June 4th, because they are the one that killed its own people. And this fight continues. And now the whole Hong Kong is even under more threat. I'm very thankful to Chairman McGovern and Mr. Congressman Christmas for mentioning the political prisoner problem now, and mentioning that today 6 activists is going to be convicted again for their peaceful demonstration. And this is now Hong Kong. And in this tension of the one country and our Hong Kong system, Carrie Lam come out and say that, oh, Hong Kong need an extradition agreement. And this is horrifying, because what that means is that people like us, activists supporting China democracy, China free labor movement, teachers, or NGO workers, preachers, anyone that want to do something in China, basing on Hong Kong, is no longer safe. Hong Kong is no longer the safe harbor for businessmen, professional, NGO workers, activists, no more safe. And that is exactly the problem that we are now facing with this threat of extradition agreement, when you can be, transferred back to China to be trial with trump-up charges or televised confession, and this is what we are facing. And in this fight, we are hopeful, because I want to show 130,000 people march out on the street to protest against this extradition agreement. So we are fighting. Professionals speaking out. And we need international community to speak up before it is too late. And I'm very glad to hear that the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act is on the pipeline. I hope that it can be passed as soon as possible to support our fight against erosion of Hong Kong as a free and international city, and also to stop this bill. And we need all the support to stop. Because if we win this, then Hong Kong is relatively still under threat, but safe to continue our fight. And so it's very important that we stop this bill. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and I think I speak for the entire panel here when I say thank you for your very powerful statements. We appreciate your candor, and we appreciate your courage. And I have to tell you, I think what you have done and what you continue to do is extraordinary. You know, we take a lot for granted in this country. Our basic freedoms, our ability to say what we believe. And I think the worst thing that could happen to any member of Congress is we get a bad news article in the press. But you literally put your lives on the line, and we are very, very grateful for that. We've just been joined by Senator Angus King from Maine, but members of Congress are going to come in and out of this hearing on and off, and some people can only stay briefly. But I want to yield to my colleague, Congressman Suozzi of New York, because he has another hearing to go to. So,
thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for convening this hearing today. I want to thank Ranking Member Smith for his great work on human rights for so many years in China and elsewhere, and all of my colleagues. I want to thank the witnesses. Thank you so much for being here today, not only for testifying, but for, I'm sure you had to prepare to come here as well. And we're very grateful that you've done so much work, and probably at great personal risk in many instances, to speak out and to stand up and to be here with us today. I think that in the United States of America and in many places throughout the world, we've all believed for the past 30 years that the more China was exposed to the Western world, the more they were exposed to America and to our way of life, to capitalism, to dealing with democratic countries, that they would over time adopt some of the values that we have in our country and in the Western world. And that simply hasn't happened. It's clear from your testimony today that that hasn't happened. It's clear from the way they treat so many different people throughout China, not just in Hong Kong, but from the Uyghurs to Tibet, to everyone that's a minority that they treat so poorly. What would you like us to do? What would you like to see the members of this panel do to help you to get the word out that China is not just a threat to America because of our trade dealings, which is a real issue. It's not just one of our greatest strategic adversaries in the world, but is also threatens human rights of people not only in China and in Hong Kong, but throughout all the places in the world they're trying to gain influence these days, that they just don't have a respect for the individual. So, Martin, you've been doing this for many years now. What would you like to see us do specifically?
Holding a session like this is a good beginning. But of course, I think it's important to tell the business people that it is in their interest that human rights for all Hong Kong people and other people living in Hong Kong are preserved under the law. Now, I think the business people are now wakening up as a result of this, because they now realize that any one of them could be brought back to China for having paid bribes many, many years ago. And then they would be made to confess before TV camera. They've seen that. And so they are now wakening up, but they rather that we fight the fight for them. They don't want to stick their necks out. They don't want to offend China because they want to continue to do business in China. I reckon, therefore, that the business people must be persuaded to come round to our cause and your cause, so that they understand that it is really in their interest too that human rights are preserved for everybody. Of course, I'd like to remind you of the famous words of Martin Niemöller, who said after the Second World War, when the Nazis came, they first came for the communists. I did not speak up for them, etc., etc. And finally, of course, they will get to the business people. So we need their support. Otherwise, your bill can be blocked, our efforts can be blocked, and Beijing would choose to be on their side, and they would have spokesmen for them, both in Hong Kong and here. So we must win over the support of everybody. And of course, what is good about the Hong Kong issue in the States is that Hong Kong has always been a bipartisan. That is why I'm happy to see members of the Congress from both sides. And may that continue.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much. Nathan, do you want to add anything to that? What you'd really like to, Martin wants to see us try and get the business community more involved in this. What would you like to see us do?
Well, thank you for the question. I think Martin's remark on that is very precise because we are having a strategic planning on that. Because if we have to overturn this extradition amendment, we need support not only for the pro-democracy camp, but also for the pro-business camp to let them to stand up for themselves. And I think what we have made very explicitly, we think that the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which I think will be introduced, yes, will be, I think it needs much more support in the Congress. And I think the human rights situation in Hong Kong and also around China should be put on the table when we have all negotiation with China. We need very value-orientated policy that we could defend the values from the liberal world. And I think it is very important for us and for the for people who support democratic value. So I think the fight for Hong Kong, we need more support, and we need it to be in the negotiation with China government.
Thank you. Mak Yin?
Well, as a journalist, we know very well that freedom of the press and of expression is the twin mothers of democracy. Without any one of it, the other part cannot survive. So it is very important to have, democracy and freedoms in Hong Kong, as well as, of course, human rights. They are part of human rights. So it is important that if, the U.S. government or any government that who deal with China can put freedoms, democracy, human rights at the heart, then it will not just benefit Hong Kong, benefit the media, as well as a matter of fact, it benefit the whole world, because businessmen doing business on clever judgment, which relies very much on free flow of information. If free flow of information was stifled, then there will be no clever judgment, and even the decision will be extorted. And so that's why it is also in the interest of the business to have more freedom and democracy in Hong Kong.
Thank you so much. And Lee Cheuk, is it okay if I ask Lee Cheuk to continue,
absolutely.
please?
Yeah, firstly, I want to tell you all about the urgency of the situation, because Carrie Lam is now going to ram through it, the bill through, before July. And even if they are even more of ruthless, they can just go direct to LegCo without going through a bills committee and pass it in
How will
1 or
the
2 weeks'
people of
time.
Hong Kong react to that?
You know, we have 130,000 people on the street, and this is not our first march. We then will have the June 4th Canada Vigil. We will continue to mobilize people in Hong Kong to oppose this law. So there's an urgency here. And so we hope that things can be done as soon as possible, including today testimony, very important. How about, you know, having a congressional delegate to Hong Kong to tell the Carrie Lam, what are you guys doing? You are trying to put foreign action, American citizen in Hong Kong at risk of extradition. It's not just about the people of Hong Kong, it's about any foreign national residing in Hong Kong, working in Hong Kong, teachers, preachers, anyone will be threatened by this law. So you have every legitimate reason to do that. And also the Human Rights and Democracy Act, if they can speed up a bit on, you know, introducing, then it is also a very important message to Carrie Lam. So I hope all this can be done. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank all of you so much. Mr. Chairman, I apologize that I have to go to another hearing. We're going to do whatever we can. We really need to get this to break into the mainstream thought of the country, in the United States, quite frankly, because people don't realize what's going on. The fact that 6 people today are going to be convicted and treated so poorly for trying to express their political rights, I just don't think people realize that's happening. So I want to thank you so much for being here today, and I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize to my colleagues that I can't stay.
We're thrilled you're here. Before I yield to Mr. Mast, I just want to build on one observation that Martin Lee raised, and that is the bipartisan nature of this this commission and the people who are sitting up here. I mean, you've got a moderate senator from Maine, and you got a conservative member of Congress from Florida, and I guess a conservative to moderate member from New Jersey, and you got a liberal, some would say too liberal congressman from Massachusetts here. But the bottom line is that there's not a lot we always all agree on, but we agree on the importance of of human rights in Hong Kong, and we have a genuine concern that brings us together on this issue. And I think that's really important to note, because if you have a coalition like this, you can get almost anything done in this Congress. So I'm happy to now yield to Mr. Mast.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the bipartisan nature of this committee. I appreciate you all taking the time to come here and speak to us. We have an amazing nation that we sit in right now, where I dare say not one of us on this podium, on this dais, fear any sort of human rights retaliation for whatever our opinions are, whatever we express up here. Our press, all the press in the room, I dare say none of them fear human rights retaliation for regardless of what they go out there and report. And that's not something that exists in every corner of this earth, as each of you have discussed specifically within China. So I want to ask for each of you, because there's a saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I don't see any photos of this, in the most graphic and vivid explanation that you can give. What have you witnessed? What have family members witnessed? What have coworkers witnessed? People you know. What can you tell us are the human rights abuses that you fear in terms of retaliation?
They have not tried to kill people unlawfully for this thing, but they have now done terrible things to the common law system. For example, 6 legislators, including Nathan Law, were disqualified and thrown out of the legislature by the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress interpreting an article of the Basic Law. But when they took the oath, even the president considered it to be fine. And then they took office as legislators. But 1 year later, the court threw them out. And you can't really blame the judge, because their interpretation would turn into something which was lawful, into something which was unlawful. And they gave it retrospective effect. And under the common law, you cannot have that. If today I do something which is in accordance with the law, fine. And you cannot, by changing the law tomorrow, convict me of an offense which wasn't even there when I did it. And yet they did that. So the 6 legislators lost their seats. So this damage to the common law is a terrible thing. And of course, they prosecute people selectively. And the organizers of the umbrella movement and the student leaders, they are the best of our people. And they are put into prison. And I have said that I would light a candle every night and pray for them until the last one of them is free.
Mr. Law, Ms. Ting, Mr. Yan.
Thank you for your question, and it reminds me a chat with Lam Wenge, who was abducted to mainland China, and he's one of the 5 booksellers who were abducted in 2015, and he received monthly long interrogation, locked it into a small room, and then it was basically mental torture for him, and a lot of
Describe that for us.
Yeah,
I'm familiar with interrogation, enhanced interrogation, and torture. So describe it for us.
That's really unimaginable for people living in Hong Kong.
That's why you need to describe it for
yes,
us.
He has to live in a very small room, and being asked not enough sleep, and being locked in a room that he suffered from mental illness. So I think it is very important for us to remind ourselves these things have never happened in Hong Kong, never publicly disclosed, and these things will be normalized and legalized after our extradition bill is passed. And I think I'm not the one who was abducted, and it is quite difficult for me to really describe the fear, but you could really look into their eyes when we have talked with him. So I think it is very important for us, for the Congress to have strong statement, bipartisan strong statement, and carry them directly to our chief executive to talk about our concern and also act immediately in order for us to stop this bill. I think it is really achievable. It is just law passing in Hong Kong, but it will destroy Hong Kong as a safe harbor. So I think it's time for prompt action, and I think otherwise these adoption will happen and happen again, and Hong Kong will no longer be safe.
Thank you, sir. If either of you have something to add about what happens when you're locked in a small room, I'd be happy to hear it. If not, sir, I'm happy to yield back.
Well, I mean, as a reporter, I have not been locked up, but I think writing a remorse letter when you're caught by the Chinese public security officers is quite common among journalists covering news in China. And that's why we feel safe when we back to Hong Kong, because after writing the remorse letter, usually they will feel you back. But that will not be the case after the amendment bill is passed. And as far as I know, why I say that the Chinese government is notorious for making up offenses that try to stop media from reporting. Actually, they are using different, they will not call it a retaliation. They call it a tool to tame people, to get what they want. Just like putting some people who are not committing any offense in Hong Kong, but when they're crossing the border, they will probably interrogated by the public security officers. I have met several cases like this. For example, there is a publisher in Hong Kong public magazines which is critical to Chinese government. He was arrested when he crossed over to mainland, and they trying to charge him with illegal publishings. And suddenly, when one of the the printer, not publisher, the printer, who go over to China, she was detained for 4 months, only asking her about the copies, how many copies were published for this magazine. What's wrong with the printer? She done nothing wrong, but the Chinese officials would like to have the figure from her. So she was detained. So you can see that all these kind of things will happen if the law is passed in Hong Kong. So it is very important to stop China from instill fear in Hong Kong people, because they know very well that once the bill was passed, no one can escape. You can only escape if you are not targeted.
30 years ago, I was arrested for 3 days after Tiananmen Square massacre. And I can always remember the fear that I have when I face up with the regime interrogating me in a small room. Though I'm lucky not tortured because of the people of Hong Kong saved me, and I was able to go back to Hong Kong after 3 days of detention in Beijing. But I also remember that another fighter for democracy in China, Li Wangyang, he was a labor activist that was jailed for 20 years, and after jailing for 20 years, he was blind, crippled, deaf, and then he went to the hospital because of some illness, and he was interviewed by the TV in Hong Kong, and he said, for democracy, I will not be fearful, and I will fight, even if I'm beheaded. And then after 1 day, after the TV interview, he was found suicide in his hospital ward. And it was obvious a forced suicide, because I very remember the rope is like that, and supposedly he jumped from his bed. But his sandals, his feet, the foot is, just flat on the floor and not like this hanging. And we said, this must be a forced suicide. Someone killed him and then pretended to be a suicide. After he said that for democracy, he will fight on even until his death, and even if he's beheaded. So you can see this is the regime that we are facing. And imagine we have been listening to all these horror story in Hong Kong. And what happened with the extradition agreement? And in Chinese, they're saying, sending the sheep to the mouth of the tiger. And this is what exactly this extradition agreement is doing.
Thank you, sir, and welcome to my senator from Florida.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to yield now to the distinguished senator from Maine, Senator King.
First, I want to say that I visited Hong Kong, but it was 20 years ago. It was one of the most vital, electric, alive, entrepreneurial places I've ever visited on Earth, and had just met people, and it was just a wonderful experience. So that leads me to my first question. Compare Hong Kong in 1997 to today, and I'll give you a scale. Give me a 1 to 10. 1 being pre-handover, and 10 being what the Chinese are doing to the Uyghurs. In other words, a sort of authoritarian scale. Where is Hong Kong today on give me a number between 1 and 10, 1 being pre-handover, 10 being extreme authoritarianism. Anybody want to take a pass at that?
Yeah, I would try to answer that. Those is not easy, but for sure, I think we have the rule of law in Hong Kong, but they are trying to do Xi Jinping, after Xi Jinping, they want to do it by fear. And the fear factor is now, really harming Hong Kong vibrant international city. But
So
on the
it's
scale,
not what it was in 1997.
in 1997, of course, there's a confidence crisis, but we are able to do our way of life, continue to protect rule of law. But after Xi Jinping, is erosion, the deterioration is getting very fast. And to make it into a scale, Uyghur problem is really far more horrible, of course, with 1 million in the detention concentration camp. That is horrible. But I think Hong Kong, I don't know, Martin, maybe we are on the scale of 4, and if the law is passed, we will go to the scale of 6, maybe. I don't know. It depends on extradition agreement. If that law extradition agreement will be passed, it will sure put the scale, to the more fearful and more horrid authoritarian state, and we are already in the middle of it, I would say.
What's the role of the Chinese government in the debate over the extradition agreement?
Carrie Lam tried to say that she is the one that pushed it forward, but then gradually, the Chinese government become to, wait in, and say that they also support this law, but not in the way of very strongly that they, back Carrie Lam. They have made some statement, but not to the highest level like Xi Jinping. So we hope that there can be still, room for opposition and room for changes to this law.
What's the time frame on the extradition law? When is it likely to either happen or not happen?
The government says certainly at the latest early July this year, but since they control the legislature completely, they could actually bring it forward. I think if they really want to do it, they could do it within 2 weeks. This is the state of affairs.
And what would the reaction of the people of Hong Kong be? Are they attuned to what's happening here? Are they aware of this potential threat?
They are more and more aware of this, because the starting point is nobody thinks that is a fugitive offender. If I haven't committed any offense, why am I an offender? And why am I a fugitive? So it takes a bit of explaining to them that all they need is to get somebody in mainland China to swear an affidavit to say that you commit a certain offense in China many years ago, and that is good enough. The court can't save you. So they're awakening. But of course, Hong Kong has always been an international city,
Right.
as you found out yourself. So we should look at Hong Kong with that standard to begin with, and see the damage to this international city which has been occurring in recent
That was
times.
that was my first question. Where are you
Yeah,
on the road to
yeah,
authoritarianism?
yeah. So to me, the most important thing is the rule of law, because without it, no freedom is safe. And then when it comes to the rule of law, I'm very distressed, because not so long ago, they did a very terrible thing in the co-location, which is really, Hong Kong wanted to join with China in the express rail, which will bring Hong Kong through Guangzhou to Beijing. Now, that's a good thing. And they want to make it easier for travelers, so that people coming into Hong Kong and people leaving Hong Kong could have their customs and everything checked on the same location. That's fine. I mean, you do it with Canada and the Euro train in England and France. But they did it in such a way which is ridiculous. They turned the area in the terminal into an area belonging to the mainland, so that Hong Kong laws no longer apply to that area, but mainland laws. So anybody found there, if you're engaged in a fight, they would bring you back to mainland China for investigation, and if they believe you committed an offense, they will try you in a Chinese court according to Chinese law. And if you're convicted, you'll be punished according to the laws of China. And if they convict you of murder, there's a death penalty. And they did it only in the name of make it easier for everybody. All right? So to me, Hong Kong was the oasis in terms of the rule of law compared with mainland China, which is a desert. So the desert, in terms of rule of law, Hong Kong is a beautiful oasis.
That's
Now
a more
in the middle
elegant
of
way of stating what I
Yeah,
tried to get
and in
at.
the middle of it-
Oasis versus desert.
Right.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Happy to yield to the distinguished co-chair, Senator Rubio.
And I thank you. I profusely apologize for being late. It took me longer than expected to convince my bank that that was not me racking up charges in Los Angeles last night. So I apologize. Only I could do that to him. But first of all, I want to thank the chairman for convening this important hearing. As we've observed over the last 5 years, Hong Kong's autonomy and freedoms that are guaranteed by the Joint Declaration and their basic law are just eroding rapidly due to the interference of the Chinese Communist Party's government in the affairs of Hong Kong. I want to thank the witnesses. You're all truly champions of freedom and democracy, and you appear today, as we know, under both threats and risk to yourself and to those you care about. The last year has been particularly troubling. Since the last time this commission had a hearing on this issue, the Hong Kong government banned the National Party, disqualified political candidates from office for their political views. They expelled the Financial Times news editor. They sentenced the 2014 Occupy Central organizers and other pro-democracy leaders to prison terms of between 8 and 16 months. We just learned this morning that the Hong Kong court has issued guilty verdicts for 6 pro-democracy advocates who participated in the 2016 demonstration against the Chinese government's interpretation of oath-taking that led to the disqualification of the pro-democracy legislators. Most recently, and equally concerning, are amendments to the extradition laws that are being, at this moment, debated in the Legislative Council and protested in the streets. And Mr. Lee's apt description of the proposed amendment, that it will, quote, legalize kidnapping, end quote, legalize kidnapping. That should be something that should concern everyone. That includes, by the way, 85,000 U.S. citizens who are living in Hong Kong. It's one of the reasons why I'll be reintroducing the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which updates our Hong Kong policy and establishes punitive measures against government officials responsible for suppressing fundamental freedoms in Hong Kong. I want to make this point. We have important challenges in our relationship with China. We have important agreements on a variety of issues that I hope we can find agreement on. But the future of Hong Kong and human rights in general cannot be sidelined as part of those conversations. And I continue to encourage the administration and others involved in these talks to make that point. I want to ask a question for the panel in general. Recently, you may or may not be aware, the CBS network, television network, recently censored 8 minutes out of a show, The Good Fight, because it contained a cartoon that criticized American corporations that are bowing to Chinese censorship. CBS claimed that it feared for the welfare of its journalists in Beijing if a critical cartoon was broadcast on an entertainment show broadcast in the United States. So think about that. And a major American network censored a television show. It was afraid to offend China and as a result put our journalists at risk operating within China. I think it's a good opportunity to talk a little bit about self-censorship and how it manifests itself in Hong Kong. Can you give us examples of how the media and news have censored content to avoid upsetting the Chinese Communist Party?
Okay. First, I would like to respond to Mr. King first. You're asking about the index. Probably I give you some figures about press freedom. I'm not talking about authoritarian, but the more the freedom, the less the authoritarian. And according to the Reporters Without Borders survey, I think in year 2000, around the handover, the ranking of Hong Kong among the world is 20-something. Around, if my memory is right, it should be 28. But then in year 2012, it dropped it to 54 already. And why I mentioned year 2012, because that is the year that President Xi Jinping took power. And now, only 6 years onward, in the year 2019, we dropped to 73 around the world, which is around 180 countries in the survey. So it can tell you how bad is the situation. And in the survey conducted by the Hong Kong journalists itself, the press freedom remarks have never got past. That is, it always lower than 50. So you can imagine the whole situation. And back to the self-censorship one, as I just said, in the survey we conducted early this year, 22% of journalists responded that they are under pressure from the supervisor when they reporting Hong Kong independence issue. There is no direct instruction saying that you cannot report on that. It is non-story. But the Chinese government officials always saying that people should not talk about independence of Hong Kong, blah, blah, blah. And 22% saying that they get pressure from the supervisors. And take into consideration that when we say 22%, it means the absolute figure is around 112 respondents from the media circle. And divided into 30 outlets, that means 3 to 4 journalists, each media outlet saying that they feel pressure. So it almost all political reporters who may cover this kind of news under pressure. And you're talking about self-censorship. 70% of the respondents saying that they feel unrest, uneasy, when they're reporting things that deviate from the Chinese government officials in Beijing. Basically, the one country over 2 countries, they feel uneasy when they're reporting comments from other people. And as far as I know, some academic, which are pro-democracy, or at least will be regarded as more independent, not just kowtowing to the Chinese government, they were blacklisted by some media outlets. And this kind of pressure, self-censorship, is not just by, apart from public statement from government officials. Sometimes the pressure by Chinese officials is imminent too. As far as I know, in the past, the Chinese official might just talk to the ownership of media outlets about, are you guys saying something that is not coincide with the Chinese government's stance? But now, the call will make directly to newsroom, to individual news reporter, or even probably more often to the middle management. So you can see that this will add up to self-censorship. And more cases have been seen. Especially the news about the independence or debate will be cut out, even though you have done it. Or something that you exposing the IT maneuver of China will be cut. That has been happened.
But let me just ask, if this extradition amendment passes, theoretically, a journalist could be extradited to the mainland for reporting that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't like. Is that an accurate and
Yeah,
realistic
I
threat?
think the most important part in the crime, one of the crime, is aiding and abetting. And when you write, you are aiding and abetting, inciting. So this is a dangerous part of the whole amendment that include aiding and abetting. So if you write something in Hong Kong or America, and you come to Hong Kong, and they charge you with aiding and abetting, they can extradite you back to China. So CBS concern about the journalists is a very genuine one, of course. But then they have to be more concerned, not just about journalists inside China, and also about their editor in Hong Kong, or anyone that are working for CBS or any other media outlet in Hong Kong. So the aiding and abetting part will threaten even more the whole media reporting, and that will make Hong Kong even more in the self-censorship mode.
I have one more question.
Can I add to
Oh,
that?
I'm sorry. Go
Now,
ahead.
advertisements are actually pulled from free media to the extent that telephones will be made by the Chinese apparatus in Hong Kong to the advertisers and say, don't advertise with this newspaper. Your competitors already don't, so you don't have to worry about them. And even banks would pull those advertisements. It's as bad as that.
Well, my final question on this, in general, is I can tell you, writ large, on the issue of China, and now in particular with Hong Kong, there are people and there are corporations that are making a lot of money operating there. Certainly access to the Chinese marketplace and maybe headquartered. And for many years, that's what Hong Kong was known for, a very vibrant, free enterprise place. And oftentimes, to be frank, the pushback we get, I'm just going to sort of put it in the simplest terms, and that is, don't keep talking about this other stuff because you're messing up our chance to make money and be profitable. Focus on the business part. Embedded in that argument is the notion that as long as the economy is moving forward and the private sector is successful, that takes care of these other issues in the long term. I don't think they're right. I actually find it offensive. And frankly, I mean, it points to one of the challenges we have in dealing with human rights is we have a corporate class that oftentimes wants us to ignore human rights because it messes up a good deal for them. But if they were here today, is there any way, what's the best way to explain to someone that what they're saying is not true, that ultimately these grotesque violations of freedoms and human rights is not good for business? And in fact, the other point they make is that it is not true to say that as long as the economy is growing and doing well, these other things take care of themselves. You can have authoritarianism and make money. How would you answer that if they were here saying that to you?
Well, I think the problem of this extradition case is quite different from the other, more human rights violation, is because the business sector in Hong Kong has spoken already. The American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong, they have issued a statement concerning of this implementation of the extradition amendment, and it is unprecedented. They have never spoken on any other issue in terms of Hong Kong's affairs. So you could see that the local business camp, and including some other local chamber of commerce, have spoken out, and they are worried about it, and they all think that it is detrimental to their business environment. But why don't they just stand up and tell their representative in the chamber to vote no, because it is a direct order, political order from the central government. So they are ruining Hong Kong's business environment in order to get greater control to Hong Kong. So I think it is a good point that we have to make. It is not only about human rights. It is also about our city's future, our vibrant culture of our business, and it's about rule of law and freedom of information. These are all being threatened when the law is passed.
May I add to that? Just imagine if a senior executive of, say, Google were to be extradited back to China, then he would be subjected to a lot of pressure to disclose trade secrets. And once you're there, you're completely in the hands.
Well,
First, I think that, of course, for economic interests of business activities, rule of law is very important. Free information is very important. And if Hong Kong loses that, then there will be no longer a fair playing field. And secondly, I think with the extradition agreement, the way of doing business in China sometimes, in this experience of Hong Kong businessmen also, you may be threatened by the arms of by the law in China, and then you have to make business deal in according to your the wishes of the business partner in China, and that is not fair. You are subject to threat, and so I think this extradition agreement should be a wake-up call for those who said that Hong Kong continue to play the role of economic freedom, and that's it, and that is okay. Is no longer okay. We are losing the rule of law, and also when there's something in China that you have a conflict with your business partner in China, they can use the law, extradition law, to get you back in China and twist your arm. And when your arm are being twisted, how can there be a good business deal? And you will sacrifice also economic interest. So the way of doing business, we need the rule of law. And I think definitely it is a wake-up call for the business community, both in Hong Kong and America.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we all know that Hong Kong is a safe harbor for lots of people, including the businessmen. We all know that in China, we have cases that financial analysts being detained or even sentenced, and no independent or much less independent report can be made. And some company actually collapse after certain years without this kind of reports. And we also know that accountants or lawyers have been almost forced to sign some IPO documents so that it can go public. But they are the one who will liable to criminality afterwards, especially after this bill was passed. So it is important to keep Hong Kong a safe harbor as we are now. We are free and open. At least they can have certain sense of safety in Hong Kong. With this bill, I can imagine the independent investigation and independent financial information will be out. Then it will be the end of a fair game of business circle.
Thank you. We've been joined by Congressman Ben McAdams of Utah. Thank you for coming, but I'm going to yield now to our colleague, Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you to our distinguished witnesses for your extraordinary leadership in Hong Kong, for the risks that you take, and I hope and pray that there's no retaliation for your appearances here today. And I think that's, we will follow it very closely, but we know that that's an ever-present problem. So know that our prayers and our hopes and our voices are with you. Martin Lee, I think in your ominous warning in your opening comments about nothing, it'll never be the same in Hong Kong should this extradition treaty go forward. Thank you for putting a very, very strong, that is a warning that needs to be heard around the world, in Washington and everywhere else. I'm not sure it has been heard the way it ought to be. I'm concerned, and you might want to speak to this, the danger of some superficial language that might be attached to the, or exceptions that businessmen might say, oh, we got our exception, we're okay. So if you might want to speak to that. And I think everyone has to realize that you know it better than anybody, and members of these commissions know it as well. When you're arrested in China, you're interrogated, you're tortured. It's endemic in what they do. They extract a coerced confession, and very often you are called upon to give up other people. I would say, not in a point of humor, but if Google's top CEO were to be sent to mainland China, they've already given everything to China in terms of intellectual property. I held the hearings back in 2006 when we had Google sit in 2172 right nearby. I swore everybody into office, Yahoo into the as witnesses, and they were collaborating with the Chinese government like no one else could collaborate in terms of surveillance and keeping out information like about Tibet or the Dalai Lama or a whole lot of other things in their censorship campaign. So I think they probably would give the head of Google a medal, but they've already taken everything from them intellectually property-wise, so he might be free and not get extradited. But again, I think there's this underappreciation of what happens in mainland China. There's no, despite the efforts by the American Bar Association and many others, there's no rule of law. They want to get you, they get you. Once you're accused, you're convicted, period. And your right of appeal is nil and none. So I hope everyone understands that. This extradition treaty, as again Martin Lee said so eloquently, it'll never be the same if this goes forward. But please, one, speak to this issue of some amendments or changes, loopholes, not loopholes, exceptions that could be very dangerous but superficial. Secondly, on religion. Last December, the Washington Post carried a piece that I submitted to them called "The World Must Stand Against China's War on Religion." And it focused on synodization, a word that ought to become a household word, certainly in the House and the Senate, as Xi Jinping tries to make every faith, every denomination, from Falun Gong to Christians to Uyghurs, comport with communist ideology, or else. You go to prison, or else you comport yourself. You allow all the surveillance cameras into your church, which is what they're doing. And of course, there is a very, very vital faith community in Hong Kong. And if you would speak to the dangers it poses to the faith community with this extradition treaty, extradition move, I should say. I would ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, that the op-ed be included in the record, because I do think it highlights that no one's excluded. All faith, even the Patriotic Church and the Three Self Church are under this new grotesque effort by Xi to synodization.
Without
So
objection.
I thank you. Third, if you could speak to that, I'd appreciate it. Third, on the reporters, and McMack, thank you for your comments. I was wondering, and just follow up on Senator Rubio, self-censorship, you pointed to that. But I'm just wondering, when the Hong Kong Journalists Association does their survey, is it done anonymously? How sacrosanct? I mean, if I were called by them and I'm in Hong Kong, I'm not sure I'm going to give them an interview, even though they might be great people. How do they guard their information? Is it done anonymously? Are you given a number?
Yeah, you're right. It's done anonymously.
It is done. Okay, thank you for that clarification. You mentioned buyouts, and Martin Lee talked about how on the ads, if they just get the corporations not to buy an ad, maybe elaborate on that. But the buyouts, how aggressive is that? Fourthly, if I could, the UK, Senator Rubio had Christopher Patton testify in the past, because he was governor, of course, there in 1997, saw the transfer. All of us were worried then, and I met with him in Hong Kong when I was there on occasions. And he was very strong in his statement. What is the UK doing? What's the EU doing? Because again, they're financial partners with Hong Kong like few others. Is the UN, are they playing any role in all of this as well? If you could speak to those issues, I'd appreciate it.
In fact, in the print media in Hong Kong, there is really only one Chinese newspaper which dares to criticize Beijing, and that's the Apple Daily. And it is targeted, of course, and so it suffers most. It used to be that thick, the newspaper, 1.5 inches. Now it's about that thick, because the advertisements are gone, are pulled out. So it's really that serious. Right. And that is the only one which dares to criticize Beijing. All the rest, print media, already decided not to do that anymore. Even the formerly independent ones, they grow in size. The formal independent, after change of ownership, then they, of course, they
as you answer that, on the internet too, have they taken over the internet like they have on the mainland?
Yeah.
But the internet revenue is not good enough to support healthy media outlets. Mr. Lee had just talking about the Apple Daily loss, the advertising revenue. Actually, I think 5 to 6 years ago, the owner, Jimmy Lai, have saying that they lost 2 billion Hong Kong dollars advertisement in 1 year. And more and more when the international company eye on the China market, in a year, they have put advertisement, but under pressure from the Chinese government officials, they withdraw their advertisement suddenly. And that tells you the fact. And for other media who criticizing this withdrawal, also facing advertisement withdrawal. So you can see the situation is really bad. And you're talking about buyout. Yes, according to my figure, around 30% of the mainstream media has been buy out by the Chinese enterprises or directly funded by the Chinese government. And for the others, they facing advertisement floods. So that's why we say more and more the self-censorship will arise, because you face the commercial pressure and even the co-opting of the media workers as well as the owners, because some owner of media outlets has been given prize as some copting into the establishment of the Chinese government, as well as given middle by the Hong Kong government. So the situation is going worse.
And I think one more figure is that 85% of the stores in Hong Kong are owned by Chinese enterprise. And imagine after the bookseller case in Hong Kong, who dare to open a bookstore? And then those books that are seen to be unwelcome by China, of course, all those bookstores, the 85% would not put it on shelf. The other 15% maybe will also be afraid. So the whole publishing business is now under threat. No one dare to publish anything that offends Xi Jinping. And so where is our freedom of press and freedom of information now in Hong Kong?
As a matter of fact, not just the publisher, selling books has been controlled by the Chinese enterprises. Actually, the printing house, well, basically they should not afraid of printing things. They are just tools, right? But as a matter of fact, more and more publishing house decline publishing articles for, you can say, pro-democracy publishers. And some have, taking the books to print it in Taiwan.
Would any of you like to speak to the ugliness of Sinization coming to Hong Kong, the war on religion by Xi Jinping?
Yeah. We still have religious freedom, no doubt about it, in Hong Kong. But we are concerned because things are happening in mainland China. Under the basic law, our religious freedom is certainly guaranteed. But we have seen so many encroachments on other promises, which are also contained in the basic law, that it's certainly reasonable for religious people in Hong Kong to fear. What happens in China? When is it coming to Hong Kong? There's always a question mark in our minds. And
UK, UN, EU?
Now, unfortunately, the UK government is too much concerned about China trade. For years, they actually kept quiet. When the central government published the white paper in June 2014, claiming that the central government has comprehensive jurisdiction over Hong Kong, it didn't say anything, because Chinese premier just then went to London and signed many contracts, something like worth $3 billion US dollars worth of, or 30 billion of contracts. And that, of course, is terrible. Beijing has rewritten the Sino-British Joint Declaration. Instead of a high degree of autonomy promised to us and already given to us, they now claim to have comprehensive jurisdiction over Hong Kong. Hence, all these things, including this extradition thing, is a clear sign that they really want to implement their new policy on Hong Kong so that they can control Hong Kong. Now, at the moment, of course, Hong Kong is still not just another Chinese city. But how soon can that last? And so far, we have been fighting very hard. We resist every encroachment on any of our freedoms. Now, and so far, we have enjoyed certainly support from your Congress. That's why we are here. We're happy to be here. And we will certainly continue with our fight in Hong Kong after we go home. The Hong Kong people will still take to the streets, I'm sure, to defend their freedoms. But with your support, hopefully, we can turn the tide.
And also, Anson Chen was in Germany, and after speaking to the German, I think it's a speaker there, there was a consideration, report from by the press that German will reconsider the extradition agreement with Hong Kong, because now everyone have every countries like UK, German, in many European countries, American, Canadian government had all extradition agreement with Hong Kong because we trust each other, the rule of law. But now with the extradition agreement, the question is, can Hong Kong rule of law still be trusted by the national community? And therefore, there are review of the extradition agreement, and I don't know whether it's something that will be taken up by the by U.S. government on this extradition agreement. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. McAdams.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the testimony. Apologies for being here a little bit late, but so I'm not entirely sure what was covered, but clearly some very interesting things. I wanted to note maybe first a couple of things. Earlier this month, we celebrated World Press Freedom Day. In the last 10 years, Hong Kong's ranking in the World Press Freedom Index has fallen 25 places to 73rd out of 180 territories. In your view, how has press freedom changed in Hong Kong, changed over the last 20 years? And describe any interference by the Chinese government with press freedom in Hong Kong and some of the challenges that journalists may be facing. And probably, I guess, Ms. Tak, probably, Ms. Mak.
Yeah, as you said, the ranking of Hong Kong press freedom has been dropped dramatically, especially, as I said, during the regime of Xi Jinping, because he would like to have, he has a more high hand and more controlled manner. And the buyout of Hong Kong media by China entrepreneur actually start from Xi Jinping's era. And whenever we fought through a way to deal with the control, Chinese government will have more resources on it. For example, internet. We're saying the internet is the self-censoring media. Well, it's a new battlefield to compensate the self-censorship of the mainstream media. And we did have several set up, around 4 to 5, and the Citizen News, which set up by me and some other colleagues, is independent online medias. But at the same time, at the same time frame, around 10 online media was set up by at least by support by the Chinese resources, as far as I know. And they have more people, more money. When the independent online have to get public funding, and which have to go through the line quite difficultly, but we still fight on. And so you can see lots of pressure putting on press freedom, because according to the Chinese regime, control the media is very important. There are two tools. One is the weapon, the other one is the pen, which they had to control the media, and that is what they are doing. But, the fight is going on, although we face lots of pressure. But the readers, the people are very clever. According to some international organizations who watch on the readership, the page view of media, we found that more than half news page are for international media and the independent media outlets in Hong Kong. And the pro-Beijing mouthpieces only get a small share. So I must stress that we face pressure. The difficulties lies ahead, but we have the support from the people, and we hope very much that more support from the international world, and as well as the local in Hong Kong, that keep Hong Kong press freedom alive. And so that a vibrant media in Hong Kong could keep Hong Kong a free and open space, good for Hong Kong and good for the international world.
I guess my next question would be for any of the panelists who feel inclined to weigh in, but maybe a little bit open-ended. What is the one thing that you would like us to take back to our colleagues in the United States Congress, and what can Congress do to help with the situation, whether it's extradition, freedom of the press, other topics?
We would suggest, as if you think possible, to have a strong statement on this issue. And I would
Is
also
that extradition specifically?
yes,
or
on the
yeah.
extradition thing. And I would suggest that the two co-chairmen perhaps can actually have a word with your Consul General in Hong Kong, Kurt Tong, so that he could be directed to speak to our Chief Executive, Ms. Carrie Lam, on this issue. And that is more immediate. And Hong Kong is the key to China. And we must be able to keep what we still have. And we need your support. And I'm glad that we always have your partisan support. And may that continue. And because we share the same core values: freedom of religion, freedom of the press, the rule of law. And these are the ideals which we would like China finally to have. But if we cannot even keep it in Hong Kong, then the Great China Dream can never be realized. And the Great China Dream for me is that everybody in China would have their human rights respected by the leaders and under the protection of the law.
And regarding to the suggestion, because I think this issue is in a very short time frame, that the government is possible to push it in next week and at most before July. So I think we need an urgent reply, and I think a delegation from the Congress is needed, because we need that presence, and we need the support from the international community, and directly talk to Carrie Lam to tell her that it is harmful to local business, to the international and business hub reputation of Hong Kong, and also to U.S. interests. So I think it has to be clearly spoken out, written, and have a direct conversation with the Hong Kong government. I think it is very important to do it very promptly and loudly.
I think it is important for the Congress and for the Parliament to take the issue to Hong Kong in an urgent manner, like making phone calls, a strong statement, which is important to tell the world that China must keep China to honor their promise. You know, it is a breaking of one country, two systems and joint declaration. If China break the promise so easily, how can the world, especially the business world, believe in China, who signed lots of contracts? And especially they're trying to, doing the One Belt, One Road and list of lots of contracts and agreements. What the Chinese government telling the world if they break the promise in Hong Kong? And I would like the gentleman here to bring this issue up to the world and tell them, beware. Whether the Chinese government is keeping promise is very important to do business with China.
Can I just end by saying that all this is doable? This bill is terrible and it can be stopped.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just had a few questions, and I know Senator Rubio has some additional questions. I know our Consul General has issued a strong statement against the extradition agreement. Was it sufficiently strong, in your opinion? I mean, do you think it was clear enough?
It can be stronger, always. Well, that's and also, I think it would be good, not just from the Consul General. It would be good for the White House, for the CECC, and maybe a co-sign, a sort of a signature of all senator and congressmen to co-sign a letter to make it, very clearly weigh in against the bill. So it would be very good that, you know, a higher level of intervention would be good from the White House and also from the Congress.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we can, on this commission, work together to try to put together something relatively quickly because, as Mr. Lee pointed out, something could be imminent, right? So we're not talking July, it could be in a couple of weeks even that we see something like that. I think we can work on something, you know, that's a bipartisan statement that's even stronger than our Counsel General's statement to make it clear that we think this is a really awful idea. But it seems to me that the other, the constituency here that is key, and Senator Rubio kind of alluded to it in his opening remarks, is the business community, right? Yeah, so we appreciate the American Chamber of Commerce issued a statement. But it seems to me that, you know, the business community, the American business community, and even the Chinese business community needs to do more. I mean, the Chinese business community can lose an awful lot if this goes through and has a chilling impact on Hong Kong. So the question is, you know, how do we persuade, how do we better persuade the American business community to take even a stronger stand, and how do we persuade the Chinese business community that it is in their interest not to see this thing go through?
I think this is the most difficult question. Because when these people care about their own good relations with China so that they can earn more money and put it into their own pockets, they don't want to stick their necks out. As I said earlier, they want us to do the fight for them. We don't mind doing that. But I always think that those who join themselves into chambers of commerce, they really, the members clearly rely on their spokespeople, the chairman of these chambers, to speak up for them. And yet, even that is difficult. I mean, for years we have not given hope, and we'll continue to see them even during our visit. But it's very difficult to get them to speak up. And I'm sure you encounter the same problem.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, I think Senator Rubio is right. I mean, look, for a lot of businesses, it's about profits and making money and not to rock the boat, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
But on the other hand, it seems to me that based on all that you have said here, that if this goes forward, it could have a chilling impact in terms of whether or not Hong Kong is a friendly place to do business.
Indeed.
And so lots of people who are concerned about money and making money could lose money.
Indeed.
Yes, that's true. And I think the business community is actually very clever. They're good at protecting themselves.
Right.
And they clearly understand the risk and the potential danger posed to the business environment to Hong Kong when this bill was passed. But I think what they need is an excuse or some other external sources to let them to leverage with the government. Because if there is no international worry, if there's no international pressure, then it may sound like these leverage are come from themselves. So they're very afraid of putting their head out and saying that it is from their own concern. If we could have some more pressure, some more statement and globally, then they could utilize and they could talk with the government saying that this is not from them, it's from the global environment. It is harmful for their own interests and the interests of Hong Kong. Then they may have more leverage. So, I mean, we're talking about very strategic way of putting them, helping them basically, even though they have a lot of other issues that may incoherent.
But I think it's a fair statement to say that whether you're a U.S. business interest or a Chinese business interest, you will lose money if this extradition agreement were to move forward. This is this would be bad for business on the American side, the international side, and the Chinese side.
Yes,
right?
that's true.
Not only losing money, losing one's freedom.
Right. Well, I know, and losing one's freedom, I think, is very, very important. But I think if we're trying to move people who are consumed with profits, that there's a cost here, and that it is urgent, and we're at a crossroads. I have a couple other questions, but I know Senator Rubio has to leave, so I want to yield to him.
And I just want to take off from that point and say, yeah, in the long term, absolutely right. I mean, it's a tough thing to do business when people are afraid to go there because they might be extradited for aiding and abetting. So absolutely. But beginning around the 1970s in this country, we grew more and more obsessed at the corporate level, particularly large multinational level, with immediate maximized returns to shareholders. So these shareholders are pushing you every single day to return profits to them. And having access to a market losing access to a market is a very difficult thing to explain, particularly to large shareholders who are banging on the door every day, why aren't we making money? I mean, 10 years from now, maybe the company's out of business. Look at the technology transfers. Some of these companies are committing suicide by going over there and turning it over, but the person running it doesn't care. They'll be gone in 4 years, and their board is very happy. So that's what we're running into here, is you've got companies who are afraid that they're going to not just lose access in Hong Kong, but lose access in the mainland if they speak out too loudly about things. But that's their issue. We are policymakers. We are interested in what's in the national interest of the United States, and it is not in the interest of the United States, or for that matter, the free world, to have the steady erosion of rights. And by the way, this is the template. This is the template. What we see now in Hong Kong is the template that the Chinese will eventually use in Taiwan. At some point, they'll go to the world and say, we want to have the same thing. Don't worry, we'll let you operate independently, and they'll break that deal as well. The Chinese Communist Party doesn't keep any deals. It is all about getting the deal in place and then later on eroding on it, each time changing the facts on the ground slowly but steadily in an irreversible pace. Which leads me to the question that I wanted to ask. I think I'll just focus this one on you, Mr. Lee. What are some of the fundamental freedoms that we would have found in Hong Kong, say, a decade ago, that are now gone or being rapidly eroded? Some that people would look at and say, I didn't realize that's the way it used to be, look how it is now.
With the freedom of the press, you have heard enough. I think maybe never enough. But the rule of law, I've said, is being eroded. And of course, Xi Jinping, when he was only the vice president, visited Hong Kong some 10 years ago and spoke in public that our judges should cooperate with the Hong Kong government. So when you have judges cooperating with the government, I don't think he understands what the rule of law really is. That is the trouble. So we are concerned about these constant erosion of the rule of law and of freedoms.
I think they have a fundamental interpretation of rule of law that's different than yours or mine. Our interpretation of rule of law is it is designed to provide justice, fairness, and equity. His interpretation of rule of law is it is designed to maintain control of society, the economy, and a country. That's the difference. The rule of law for them is whatever is a tool. Rule of law means having the power to stay in power and to enforce whatever it is the government wants. For you and I, rule of law means we have a contract. Someone needs to decide the fair outcome of it if there's a dispute, or someone's charged with a crime. Did they really do it or not do it?
Yeah,
that's a very different interpretation. They understand rule of law. It's just not your or my understanding of it.
I think theirs is only the rule by law. The rule by law.
That's the exact way to put it.
But I would rather that they put me into prison without a trial, rather than to have me tried according to their law, which doesn't give me any freedom at all.
Right.
Yeah. So, so as to when a statement made by your government perhaps is strong enough, I would say that depends on the consequence. When the result of a statement leads to the withdrawal of the bill, then I know it's strong enough.
Can I just make one more point? Because a lot of times people will say, well, yeah, you have these hearings and you make these statements and you offer and pass these laws, but in the end, if they want to do this, they're going to do it anyway. It is fair to say, you've all observed the Chinese Communist Party, you've seen its operations. They do care. They do care. They don't like this hearing. I assure you, we'll get the letter, the obligatory letter criticizing us, or we'll get the print up in their influenced media or the like. They don't like this. They don't like public attention to the religious persecution that occurs in the country, the lack of freedoms, the erosion of previously. They don't like the fact that this hearing's taking place today, and it is in fact one of the few things they've ever responded to is international criticism and international attention being paid to their abuses, because they think it harms them in terms of the world's view and their ability to operate in other parts of the world. Is that not accurate?
Yeah, I think it's very accurate that they listen to power, actually. They don't listen to reason. We are talking reason, but they don't listen. When 130,000 people on the street, they say number don't count, because they only listen to Xi Jinping, the government of Hong Kong. But I want to go back to your question about the freedom part. Of course, you have already mentioned that the freedom of protest had already been eroded because of a political prisoner. But I want to point out one point is very saddening for us in Hong Kong, is they are trying to suppress the whole young generation. They are trying to get all young generation, like Nathan Law, he has was disqualified. But the danger is not just disqualified as legislator. Many of them are disqualified as candidates, so they cannot run for office. And the whole young generation, denial of their political participation right, because they want to destroy all hope for the future, and to put despair in the people of Hong Kong. Fear and despair is how they try to control Hong Kong. And this is what we are trying to fight back with hope and continuous mobilization, protest, to show to the world that we still care about Hong Kong and we want to stick our head out. And even though our own freedom is at stake, we will continue to fight. And I think this is the crash of the two worlds, or the crash of two values, and we are in the forefront of the battleground, and we need support.
If I may say so, I entirely agree, Mr. Co-Chairman, with your observation. China does care about this hearing. It does care about statements from this body, and they pretend not to. But they certainly hate us much more for coming before you than ever before. And that is why it works. That is why strong public statement or a visit by your delegation, one from each party will do. But it must be...
Or just blame it on McGovern and Smith. Tell them that...
And China always says that she honors international agreements. Hong Kong should be the litmus test. That is, this is an international agreement over Hong Kong.
Right. Yes, did you have? Yeah, and Mr. Smith has an additional question.
Just real quick, if I could. Again, on the religious freedom issue, as far back as 2005, Cardinal Zen had raised questions about the education law and the ability of the Catholic Church to run schools. I wonder if you could update us where that is, and are there any faith-based entities, schools? What is their potential fate now, especially with Xi Jinping synodization? And secondly, right now the big focus with the White House is on trade talks with China. Many of us have argued, I've argued it repeatedly, that we need to focus on human rights and we need to focus on Hong Kong. But I'm concerned that all of the talk about trade crowds out the necessary dialogue and concern being expressed by Secretary Pompeo and the rest of our White House efforts to raise these issues. It's great to have a good statement. I mean, this commission did a good statement, but it seems to me if it comes from the very top and from the Secretary of State in a very, 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 clear way, it could have a profound impact. But the question is, do you think the trade talks are crowding out that necessary? And this is like slipping in all of this extradition initiative under the cover of the trade talks, because that gets all the attention.
Yes, I think, well, for now, the trade negotiation between U.S. and China is not just about trade. It's about a battle of two values. It's about a battle of two beliefs. And it's about how the world order should be reviewed. So I think it is very important for us to stick our hand to Hong Kong, a place that is allies to the free world, and say that the battle between these two values, we definitely support the ones we support democratic values.
What I'm saying in terms of crowding out, the diplomatic dialogue only has so many avenues of contact. And if everything is trade, and human rights fall backseat, and Hong Kong, including human rights in Hong Kong, fall to the backseat, are you concerned about that? Because I am.
As the unions, we always say that trade and workers' rights and human rights should be linked.
Oh yeah.
How can trade is about people,
Right.
and people rights is at stake.
But
and
again,
you
I
only
agree
trade-
1,000%. But what I'm concerned about, because now there isn't that much time, the issue of the extradition treaty could get obscured by the focus on trade to the exclusion of all else. That's what I'm concerned about. Are you-
I hope this is not the case then. The extradition agreement should be part of the discussion. I mean, when business interests or business personal safety are at stake, how can you trade when you are threatened?
That's right.
And I think that it will be hopefully they.
You seen evidence that in the trade talks, the issue of the extradition treaty has been
No, we
front and center?
didn't see anything on that. And we don't know where the extradition agreement, sort of, as you said, crowd out.
Martin Lee, if I could, on the schools?
Yeah. On the education ordinance, there was amendments, and I was finally the counsel for the Catholic Church before the Court of Final Appeal. Unfortunately, I didn't win the case for them. And so it requires a lot of extra work on the part of the churches to get the right people onto the committees. You have, in every school has a committee, and that is why it's more difficult to get good people onto these committees. But actually, it's working, but with difficulty.
Okay.
Yeah. And the trade talks, of course, at the end of the day, there would be a deal of some kind. But what good is a deal if it is not honored? And the Hong Kong agreement is not honored. So one has to keep that in mind.
Great point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a few more questions, but I'm going to, don't leave until we finish. I want to ask those questions. But we're joined by Senator Daines from Montana, who's a valued member of this commission, and I want to yield to him for any remarks or questions he may have.
Chairman McGovern, thank you. Much appreciated. And I want to thank you for coming before this commission, providing your perspective and your expertise on a very important topic. Some of you might know, spent over 5 years living in Guangzhou. In fact, during that time, we had 2 children born in Hong Kong. So we went over with 2 children, and we came back with 4. And we had 2
And come
born.
back to Hong Kong again and have more.
Yes, exactly. Well, we have great memories of our time there as expats. I was working for Procter & Gamble, P&G, then, as we were working to launch businesses to take American brands and develop them and sell them across China, Hong Kong, and frankly across all of Asia. So I've had a chance to live it, to breathe it, experience it in a very profound way, and it was formative for our family and for my years in business before I got into public service. I've witnessed both very positive developments over the years as well as very concerning developments as somebody who actively is engaged in these issues in China and Hong Kong. When we were there in the early 90s, and in fact I was in Hong Kong on the night of the handover on June 30th, 97, when I saw Chris Patton and Prince Charles hand the keys over. And since then I've led CODELs to China and Hong Kong. And I think it's very important. I've said the only thing more dangerous than a U.S. Senator who's never been to China is one who was there 15 years ago. And I've changed my thinking there and say it's one who was there 5 years ago, because the rate of change that's going on is, again, both positive and negative. When we were first launching business there, China was a $500 billion economy. Today, somewhere north of probably $13 trillion. I bring senators to the region. We spend time in Hong Kong. We spend time in China. And from these visits and the feedback I receive from officials in Hong Kong, it's apparent that human rights in Hong Kong are eroding, and the influence of mainland China is continuing to grow. This is an important issue that we need to address. I want to thank this commission for being active on these topics. Mr. Cheuk-yan Lee, I have a question for you. Before the 97 handover, you supported defending Hong Kong's autonomy under the one country, two systems. In light of the recent steps taken by Hong Kong authorities to hinder political participation and infringe on human rights, do you believe that model is still sustainable?
It was definitely under threat and eroded. You know, and when before 97, we believed that maybe after 10 years of the handover, we will have universal suffrage, because that's the promise. And we try to fight for that. But the promise was lead to every cycle of, you know, a political reform debate. It was a disappointment. It was delay, and then even with the umbrella movement, they used the National Political Congress decision in August 31st, 2014, to crush or to destroy all our hope for true universal suffrage on that round, and then erupted the umbrella movement to continue the fight. So We have been fighting for so many years, and it's a disappointment. And I've said it's also a very much of a suppression on the aspiration of younger generation that is worrying me, because we have to pass the torch on, of course, the fight on, and they are trying to do that by disqualifying legislator and candidate from a younger generation, and this is very, very much of the scheme, I would say, of the Communist Party regime to suppress all hope for democracy in Hong Kong, erode our freedom, now further threaten us with the extradition agreement, and then tell Hong Kong people that they are no longer Hong Kong, they will be the Great Bay Area. And you will be part of a nice city called Great Bay Area. And where is Hong Kong? Submerged in this Great Bay Area business model, they call, and then everything under control. So the control part from China will be there, and we are only allowed to do some, business under the control of the Communist Party.
It really is remarkable how quickly time passes. I remember being there on June 30th, 1997, watching the Union Jack come down for the last time. And here we are nearly at the halfway mark of the 50-year SAR. As you look now, as we virtually reaching halftime now in that 50-year period, where do you see human rights in Hong Kong looking at the next 20 plus years?
I think, firstly, of course, is under threat and deterioration. And after looking forward to the future, it very much depends on, the development of China, inside China. So I will believe the people connection is very important. We are not fighting alone in Hong Kong. People in China are fighting. They are fighting for the rights. We are fighting the right of existence. And then China human rights defenders are fighting for rule of law inside China. And there are workers' rights activists so also fighting for workers' rights. So we believe that this, Hong Kong as a base to support that, and our own fight together is the same fight. And we would want to change China, as I've said, before China changes us. And we are losing time. We have only, as you said, half time now. And we are under threat. So it may go down the drain, but we will try to reverse the train by continuing our struggle for true democracy in Hong Kong, and also to support our Chinese brother and sister inside of China to fight for their rights. So we hope that by this combination of forces, that we can resist the Communist Party further erosion in our rule of law.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. Lee, Mr. Martin Lee.
May I answer that question? Because you asked whether one country, two systems is still sustainable.
Yep.
Now, right from the start, when Deng Xiaoping announced it before 1984, I already said it is possible for it to work, but it will be very difficult. And there are two conditions, otherwise it's not workable. The first is that China must learn to respect Hong Kong's system. And I use this example of a game which we all play when we were young, the seesaw game. Now China is the much bigger system. It's like a grown man sitting at the end, and the little boy would be going up, unless the grown man moves towards the center until an equilibrium is struck. Then you've got a game. So the mainland authorities must do everything possible to help Hong Kong to maintain our different system. But the Hong Kong government must stay at the end to exert maximum weight to our system to protect it. The other one is there must be democracy, so that those in power in Hong Kong will be answerable to the people through the ballot box. And if they are not seen to be standing on our side, whenever there is any conflict of interest arising, they would not be re-elected. So there are these two conditions. Now democracy, nowhere in sight. And Carrie Lam, our chief executive, said last year, it will be unrealistic to now push for democracy. She said it's like knocking your head against a wall. But that's her job to do that. And we don't have this equilibrium either, because the central government keeps on interfering in Hong Kong's internal affairs. But what other option is there? That is a problem. So we must insist we must insist that China honors her obligations and her promises made in the Sino-British Declaration and now embodied into the basic law. We must push them back to Deng Xiaoping's blueprint for Hong Kong.
I want to thank you for those comments. I want to shift directions here and talk about some of the concerns raised related to a recently proposed extradition bill. I can tell you I was extremely disturbed to read about a murder in 2018 where a Hong Kong resident was accused of murdering his girlfriend in Taiwan, fled back to Hong Kong to avoid persecution and extradition. Why could the Hong Kong government not use the existing legal authorities that permit case-by-case extraditions instead of creating an overarching extradition bill that could jeopardize human rights? Mr. Martin Lee.
Now, at the moment, there is no such law in Hong Kong, even on a case-by-case basis, unless we negotiate with Taiwan. So we must change the law. But the Bar Association in Hong Kong actually said there is another easy way, and that is to amend our existing law to allow Hong Kong courts to assume extraterritorial jurisdiction over the offenses, serious offenses committed by Hong Kong residents outside Hong Kong. And that would be a very simple amendment to enable that to be done. Or we can actually sit down with Taiwan and enter into a case-by-case arrangement basis. But at the moment, the Hong Kong government used this as a pretext. You're quite right. It's a pretext. And they say because of this, we must hurriedly change the entire system, the entire extradition system of law in Hong Kong to enable even Hong Kong people to be sent back to China for trial.
So what was Beijing's response to this bill?
Now, at the moment, there is not much evidence that Beijing was behind it, but I cannot believe such an important bill would not have the express blessing from Beijing, if not on its initiative.
So to follow up too, there's concern that this new extradition bill would violate several key provisions in the U.S. Hong Kong Policy Act, including the continuation of the U.S. Hong Kong Extradition Treaty and the encouragement of U.S. businesses to operate in Hong Kong. How would you respond to U.S. legislators that are concerned about this law and how it might impact the U.S. Hong Kong Extradition Treaty?
Yes. I think U.S. business people working, living in Hong Kong, and in fact, even priests, there are ministers and teachers from this country working in Hong Kong to help our students and so on. Now, all these people will be at risk because all it needs is an affidavit from somebody in China to say that whoever this person is that they want to punish had committed an offense, a criminal offense, many years ago in Shanghai or whatever, and then that person can be transferred if the law is changed. And once you're in China, you're liable to make confessions before a television camera. And so no American resident in Hong Kong is safe once this bill is passed.
Thank you. Chairman McGovern, you've been more than gracious on time.
No,
Thank you.
we're happy. Thank you for being here.
No, very much
Appreciate
appreciate it. You bet. Thank you. And thank you.
Mr. Dane, I would like to supplement a bit when you're asking about the Chinese government attitude towards the bill. Just a few days ago, the vice chairman of the Hong Kong Basic Law Committee, which is a subsidiary of the National People's Congress in China, saying that the bill, he support the bill, and he say the bill should be done earlier, and more will come, so that a regional legal structure can be set up. So you can see that the introduction of the amendment to change the extradition law now is an opening up to the change of Hong Kong legal system so as to adapt or to incorporate Hong Kong into the Great Bay Area.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments. I have many fond memories of riding the Star Ferry back and forth. My wife and I enjoyed our years there and always enjoyed visiting Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Join the delegation coming to Hong Kong.
Well, we are. Yeah. We have a tour guide now. To be honest with you, I think the Chinese government should be concerned about this hearing, and not only by the testimony that's being given here today, but again by the group that assembled here to listen to your testimony and ask questions. I mean, this is a very diverse political array of members of Congress who probably can't come to agreement on what to have for lunch, right? But we are in agreement that it is important to uphold a high standard of human rights in Hong Kong. And with regard to the extradition treaty, I mean, from a human rights perspective, this is a problem. So if you care about human rights, we all ought to be advocating against it. If all you care about is profits, you ought to be against this because it creates an atmosphere in Hong Kong, quite frankly, that will be hostile to business. And not just U.S. and international businesses, but if you're a Chinese business leader as well, you should not want this. So for a whole range of reasons, this is not only a bad idea, but a horrible idea. Senator Rubio and I issued a statement as co-chairs of this commission against this a few weeks ago. We will regroup and figure out how we can get everybody to issue even a stronger statement as a reminder to the powers that be that this is a terrible, terrible idea. We will work also to persuade the administration that these issues must be brought up in the course of these trade negotiations. Look, I'll be honest with you, I'm disappointed that human rights, and I'll be fair, to be bipartisan, not just in this administration, but in other administrations, human rights, when it comes to trade deals, tends to be sidelined. And I think that is really unfortunate, because if you ignore human rights, you encourage turmoil and more instability in places that you're dealing with, and it becomes, again, a hostile climate for business and for the kind of freedoms that are important to be able to pursue business. So we need to do better. I mean, our government, the United States government, we stand for anything. We need to stand out loud and four square for human rights. We need to be more vocal on this. We need to make sure that that it is crystal clear that this is a big deal, and we also need to be thinking, imaginatively and out of the box on ways that we can help move that message forward. China's human rights record is getting worse. I mean, we know about what's happening to the Uyghurs. We know about what is happening to the Tibetans. And we have raised these issues over and over and over, and yet the situation deteriorates. So thinking imaginatively, we passed the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act, so that there's a consequence for those who are actually designing and implementing these oppressive policies against Tibetans. I passed the Magnitsky Act with regard to human rights abusers and corrupt officials in Russia. Working with Congressman Chris Smith, we have now the Global Magnitsky Act. So there's a tool there. And there needs to be a consequence that is real and that is constructive in terms of making it clear that this stuff is important to us. So we have heard you loud and clear about the need to ramp up our voices on this extradition law, and we need to do it now. But just a couple of just other questions, if I can. So less than 2 weeks ago, pro-Beijing lawmakers in the Legislative Council tried to remove lawmaker James To, who, by the way, was originally supposed to be a witness at today's hearing but couldn't come because of Legislative Council business. But they tried to remove him from chairing the Bills Committee that is responsible for vetting the extradition bill and replace him with a pro-Beijing lawmaker. What are the developments since then? How are pro-Beijing legislators abusing procedures to bypass the concerns of pro-democracy advocates regarding this extradition bill and, quite frankly, a lot of other legislation that's important?
In fact, interestingly, there are now two bills committees, one chaired by James To and the other one chaired by a pro-Beijing guy. And it happened this way. After two meetings, chaired by James To, because he was the most senior member, so by tradition, he chairs the meeting for the election of a chairman and deputy chairman. But because of a number of questions were asked of him and they had to answer them, and people would say filibustering, no decision was made after the first meeting. nor was a decision made after the second meeting. Then the probation people then got fed up, and they decided to get rid of him. But instead of having a meeting to do that, they did it by circulation of papers, which is unheard of, because you cannot do that if there is only one guy objecting. You can't do it by circulation of papers. Anyway, they did it in this stupid way, and succeeded, they thought, of electing another chairman, Mr. Cheuk, for their Bills Committee, and then they did not attend the original one under James To. So when James To conducted the third meeting, the probation people were not there because they decided to cancel it. But they had no authority. James To was still the chair.
Right.
So they elected James To as the chairman of the Bills Committee. So they themselves, then the other people, also elect this Mr. Cheuk of their Bills Committee. Now, there are now two, and I don't know how they're going to sort it out. So that is the state of affairs. It's interesting. This is unheard. This is new territory.
Right.
But let me supplement to what Martin just said, and there is an imminent threat that are posed by this kind of ruthless acts from the pro-Beijing camp, and they could actually violating the tradition of our legislative council and bypass the bills committee and get the bill directly to our general meeting, which means that they could have get rid of all these detailed scrutiny in the bills committee where we used to have,
right,
and then get the government's versions bill directly to the general meeting. So it means that if they are determined to do so, it could be put
right,
in the meeting next week. So it can be a very urgent case, and it can be dealt with within a month's time. So I think it is very important for us to say that Hong Kong issue is very urgent. The attention to this bill is very urgent, and the trade war maybe in a more long-term perspective.
Right.
But this thing we have to focus now. We have to put attention and put pressure now.
Clearly, they're trying to rig the system, and that's. I just have a couple more questions, then I'll let everybody close with whatever we forgot to ask. Okay.
Don't worry, Mr. Chairman. We're going to waive our lunch.
I want you to come back if we need you. The transshipment of dual-use and sensitive technology and the effective enforcement of U.S. and U.S. sanctions has been a priority of U.S. Hong Kong relations, particularly over the past year. There have also been reports of sanctions evasions by Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou through a Hong Kong-based company. So what is your assessment of Hong Kong as a transshipment point for restricted dual-use items? And especially given the egregious human rights abuses in Xinjiang, do you see Hong Kong as a potential transfer point for technologies that the Chinese government is using to suppress the Uyghur people?
Well, I think the evidence of the Hong Kong government being used as a white glove of the Chinese government, bypassing all the trade restriction, importing dual-use technology goods in Hong Kong is quite clear. And for us, even though we have to consider the economic situation in Hong Kong, we try not to harm its general economic trade condition in Hong Kong. But I think these specific items that are, or specific goods that are being transported, being used to bypass the restriction, it needs actions to really safeguard the reputation of Hong Kong. It is because we, as an international city, as a free trade center, we don't want to be accused as a white glove for any regime to bypass any restriction. So I think restoring the reputation of Hong Kong is very important.
Yeah, I think it's the responsibility of Carrie Lam to make sure that this not happen. And imagine Hong Kong, we have the Economic and Trade Office here, and they should, ensure, assure the American public and Congress that this is not happening, because this is the values of Hong Kong as an international city. So I think Carrie Lam had to be responsible if any of this happened, and we hope, of course, nothing of this sort had happened, but this is an administrative measure to make sure that Hong Kong remain as it is, a fair playing field for all.
And in the words of your Consul General in Hong Kong, Kurt Tong, the Hong Kong government is but a proxy of the Beijing government.
Right.
That is the problem.
And I have one final question, Ms. Lee, this is for you, and then I will ask you, for everybody here to sum up any last thoughts you may have. But this year is the 30th anniversary of the violent suppression of the 1989 Tiananmen protests. And as the Secretary of the Hong Kong Alliance in support of patriotic democratic movements in China, you've helped to organize the annual Candlelight Memorial for Tiananmen Square in Hong Kong. And my question is, like, what is the legacy of the Tiananmen protests in Hong Kong, and how do the people of Hong Kong remember this event, and what kind of impact does it have on their views about the Chinese government?
Mr. Chairman, it should be the other Mr. Lee.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you for the
Sorry,
question.
my apologies.
You know, my generation is the '89 generation where we start our fight, and I think it's the same with Mak Yin-ting. We were on the same flight that tried to come back to Hong Kong on June 5th. I was arrested 3 days, so I was forced down the plane, but she moved on back to Hong Kong, and I can only back to Hong Kong on the 8th. And so we are this generation that want to change China, want to fight for democracy in China. And because we believe it's not about China, it's also about Hong Kong.
Right.
It's the aspiration for democracy, our values, our way of life in Hong Kong is also threatened if China, as it is now, a totalitarian regime. And so it's very important that we continue the fight. And this year coming, it will be the June 4th Candlelight Vigil. And I hope that, as we have suggested, I hope that there can be a congressional delegation to Hong Kong. It's quite easy to fly to Hong Kong. And to make it before June 4th even, for our Candlelight Vigil, when 100,000 of people lit up a candlelight to preserve their memory and also pass on to the younger generation. But recently we have harassment. We try to set up a June 4th museum. And the June 4th museum effort to educate the Hong Kong younger generation, the public, and also mainland visitors to Hong Kong can go to our museum to see what had happened 30 years ago when the whole China cannot mention the word June 4th.
Right.
There were activists that brew a wine called 89, that sold for 89.64 renminbi, that say that remember June 4th as a label. They were arrested and jailed for 3 years just for that wine. And that is the extent of the regime effort to wipe out the whole memory. And so in Hong Kong, we are very strategic in that sense, that we preserve that memory. And it's very important to fight forgetfulness or wiping out memory with memory. And we try to preserve that. But our June 4th museum is being constantly harassed. There are protests downstairs. There are people sitting out our June 4th museum. There are people that storm into our museum and then pour some salt water on our electric socket, trying to delay our opening. And there are lots of harassment on our freedom to commemorate. But we will try to preserve that, and we will continue to fight. Thank you.
Yeah, media also work into the fighting against the wipe out of memory. A group of 64 reporters writing books about it, a factual account of the brutal suppression of the democratic movement in China in 1989. And we have periodically updating the book so that people will not forget, because the Chinese government will not allow room for people to, telling the factual account of this. And this year we also publish books, videos, so that the new generation will know what is happening on. So that kind of war against the wipe out of memory needs all of us on it.
Well, and I think that is incredibly important because I think one of the weapons that the Chinese government is using now, not only with regard to the uprisings in 1989, but to a whole bunch of other histories to try to erase the history. a few years ago, I was with then leader Pelosi, and we were allowed to go to Lhasa, and we went to the museum, and I was just amazed that like there was a whole bunch missing. Like there's no mention of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. There's no, you can't buy, I mean, not only in the museum, you can't buy a book, you can't, so, I mean, they choose to basically, you know, try to erase that memory and believe that, you know, in a couple of generations, people will forget. What they don't count on is that people don't forget. And you can, you know, ban books, and you can, you know, ban pictures in museums and exhibits, but people tell their children, and their children tell their children, and they tell their children, and it just doesn't go away. And in fact, in many respects, these memories become even stronger. So we appreciate your efforts there. Let me, and I'm going to ask you guys to maybe any final comments if you would like to make. This is your opportunity to. If we missed anything, or if anything, last thing you want to say for the record.
Mr. Chairman, we are, of course, eternally grateful for you and your members to conduct this hearing in a timely manner, because time is not on our side.
Right.
And whereas people would be concerned about the trade war between the U.S. and China, of course, it will take a generation to sort them out. But this particular one is much more narrow and is completely achievable. So we would urge you and your colleagues to do the sort of things, consider the things we have suggested to you at this hearing. And we thank you very much indeed.
Anybody else? We all. Well, let me just say. Let me also thank you know, members of this commission who showed up here today. My co-chair, Senator Rubio, and I want to thank the staff of the commission, John Stivers, Sabrina Tsai, who did the bulk of the work preparing for this hearing, and so we're grateful to her. I want to thank Judy Wright and Scott Flipsy, and who also helped out, and I you know, and I want to thank everybody for being here. I'll just close by saying that I thought today's testimony was incredibly powerful. I think that you have made clear for us the urgency of this situation, and we are on the side of the people of Hong Kong, and we are on your side on this, and we will certainly take your suggestions seriously and do the necessary follow-up. But I look forward to our meeting again very soon, and thank you very much, and the hearing is adjourned. A little bit, yeah.
So just, you can give me a high sign and I'll just stop.